condition that we want to verify. For each condition, we need to make sure we have an expectation, and then when we test the expectation, we will see the results. And if the results are according to our expectations, we will consider the test case is passed. If it's not, we'll consider the test case is failed. For example, look into this scenario. In this, we have a requirement, and the requirement says user must have a ability to create an account. So in the test case, I have a test case outline that says verify that user is able to create an account. So if we are able to create an account, this is a successful criteria. And the other one says verify that the user is not able to create an account if there is already an account. So if there is an existing account with the same first name and last name, the system should not allow create an account. So that's how you read a requirement, and then you create different outlines. Similarly, there is another example. So for each positive test case, we should have some negative test cases too. For example, if I'm able to create an account with first and last name, now the next negative could be, okay, what if I provide no first and last name? What if I just provide first name? What if I just provide last name? So these are all our negative test cases. A good test case should have these in the template. For example, for each test case, we should assign an ID. Usually, these IDs are system generated, or you can also create an ID by yourself just to make it a unique. A test case name. So, for example, you want to test the first name is valid or not, or system accept first name or not. And then the description. In the description, you would want to test or an overall high level description of the test case. So, for example, that um, if I provide valid username and password or first and last name, the system should create an account successfully. Then you provide steps. For steps, you should mention that how are you going to perform the test. For example, you go there, go here, or click on this button, or send, hit on send. So all these steps should be listed, so that if you are not there, anybody else is testing the application or API, that person should be able to follow these steps and perform the testing. Expected results. So at the end of the performing all of the steps, the expected results should also be listed, so that we can actually test, and if it matches with the expectations, we'll consider the test case as passed, and if it does not, then we'll put the actual results. Like if you received an error message, you'll put the error message received. Same thing with status. So for the status, we will have either passed or failed. If the test case is passed, all good. If the test case is failed, we'll create a defect and share it with your team so that it can be fixed. Um, then the other thing is, it depends the team or the company you will be working on. Some companies do require you to write these test cases formally and get an approval before actually start testing. Some companies do not require you to write these test cases. Somewhere you can, in some companies you can just write an outline and start testing. So it all depends on your team or the company or the project you'll be working on. You'll just follow their process. These are some of the preparations for the test cases. For example, the test case should be valid. After a while, it might be a possibility that your test case is not valid anymore. So it's a good habit or approach to always keep your test cases updated. The test data that you will be using in the test case should be valid all the time. Um, if there is a failed test case, create a defect right away. And there are a few more preparations or guidelines out there. In order to create a test case, these are some of the highlights I mentioned. For example, always try to think outside of the box, come up with negative scenarios, ask your team. The team can provide you good test cases as well sometimes, because the developer have actually coded the function or the application. They know what could be the possible negative scenarios or positive scenarios, or sometime we don't have the business knowledge or domain, so ask your business team and they can provide you good test cases scenarios. Ask the development team, ask product owner, ask a business analyst, whoever is on the team, ask them, hey, if you would be testing this application or API, what would you test? What are the things that could go wrong? So always think on these things and then create your test cases. As I said, always think outside of the box, and there is an example I mentioned here. So if you noticed in our previous scenarios, we tested as valid SSN. Now, what if you provide invalid SSN? What if you provide valid SSN but in the wrong format, like this one? So these are your test case as well. And then the other one is always come up with positive and negative. For example, here I have SSN that has A and B in it. So what would happen if you provide SSN like this? So for each field, you should have a positive and negative scenarios. In our API, if you know, notice we have first name, last name, SSN, address, a zip code, and then country, and all those other details, phone number. So for each field, you'll have a positive, like if you provide everything good, it should accept. If you provide anything wrong, it should not accept. It depends on the requirements. Add regression test cases. Regression test cases basically means if there is any piece of the application that touches what you are testing. So for example, if you are testing the driver post API, you should also test the driver get API with it, because the get API is linked to the driver post API. If you are testing driver post API, you should also test the driver patch API or put API or delete API, so that anything that is linked to whatever you are testing should also be tested. Because most of the times, if the developer makes a code change in one piece, the whole module should be tested, because the whole module is using the same code. So anything that is using that code should be tested. We do not know sometimes, so that's where you ask the developer, hey, do you know what piece of application is using this piece of code? And they can tell you, and then you can test those modules. So for example, let's say they changed an API that is being used by 10 other applications or 10 other APIs. So you ask them, what are those 10 APIs, or what are those 10 different applications that are using this API that you are testing right now? And then you create a test case for each of the application and make sure that API is successfully being used everywhere else. Do ad hoc testing on other components. We just talked about this. So make anything that is being used by that application should also be tested. This is also we already discussed. Ask your team, ask the development, or ask business, anyone who's on the team. Ask them, hey, how would you be testing if you would be the QA person on this team? And they can give you different ideas that you can test.